I'd like tonight to expand on some of the things that I talked about in the question and answer period last time. If you weren't here, you might want to listen again to those, but you'll hear most of it, I think, repeated tonight. And it has to do with, well, if you're going to drink from the well of being, we have to work with the resistance in ourselves to doing that. We have to understand it and persuade it in a way of the value of what we're doing. And perhaps you ran into that a little this week in your meditation. It's always something to maintain a meditation practice, to actually get to it, to actually root it in your life. And many of you know you run up against various resistances. And certainly you can ask about your specific resistance in the question and answer period. But tonight I thought I'd talk a little bit more about the phenomenon of thinking in meditation, which is one of the ways, it's not the only way, but one of the ways that people find it hard to just breathe and be, because their mind is rather busy. And this kind of non-conceptual presence that we're entering into feels kind of alien and not easy, which is kind of a paradox, because it's, I think, what your mind naturally is at rest, naturally is. And yet it doesn't seem that way often when you're meditating. It often feels like it's a struggle in some way. So I'd like to address that a bit tonight. Something about what that struggle is. And so I'll review two of the things I said last week and introduce a new idea about the whole thought thing. Last week I gave, in answer to a question, I gave a kind of classical Vipassana mindfulness meditation answer to what to do about thinking, which is to notice it. And particularly to notice it dissolving. When a thought comes up, it's important to see you don't invite it. It just happens. You don't even notice thinking is happening until you're usually midway into it, or perhaps at the end of many minutes of pondering something. That may not happen so easily in this class because you're hearing my voice, but if you try to meditate on your own without any guidance, just sitting down to meditate, I think you'll see more clearly what I'm talking about is that thoughts can take over. They can last a long time without anybody being able to see that that's what's happening. So the first step is to see that that's what's happening. And each time you do that, each time you break into these automatic thought trains, you create a moment of freedom. You create a moment of space around that thought. And if you see clearly, you see that it's just thinking. It's just an event that's happening in this here and now space of consciousness. It's just an event. Thinking is an event. It's something that arises, continues, and ends in that sort of way. And there's something about seeing this clearly that begins to take away some of the power of thinking. Begin to become a little bit disenchanted with it. And that's actually the idea that I want to introduce tonight, is that we're actually enchanted with our thoughts. We're in love with thinking. We actually are. even when we say we're not. We're often in love with our thoughts. And so it's hard to let go of them. It's hard to release them. They have an energy which sticks to us. And there's something in us that really actually wants that stickiness. So to begin with, in just kind of the classical mindfulness way, you notice that thinking is happening. You notice that as you notice thinking, it tends to weaken and dissipate. It just sort of vanishes. The thought just vanishes. Even though it might start up again the next moment, you're not quite as present as you were. That's just the nature of thought. And you start to have some insights into the fact that thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true. Once you clearly hear your mind say something, sometimes you can see, oh, that's not true. If the mind tells you, oh, I've never been good at meditating, as you're meditating or any time else, just notice it as a thought. It's not necessarily true. That judgment of what's good at meditating or not good at meditating, might not be valid. So those are some things that kind of come with that practice. It's helpful if you don't think that you're supposed to rid your mind of thoughts when you meditate. If you have that goal, you can become very tight around it and very discouraged because it's difficult to do. And needlessly discouraged, because each time you wake up in the middle of a thought is powerful. That itself can be the practice, just waking up in the middle of thoughts. Though if you're just waking up in the middle of thoughts, you might not feel like you're drinking from the well of being yet. And you're right, you're probably not. So, but I want to validate it as a completely legitimate place to be, completely legitimate place of practice, to just be waking up over and over again to the fact you're thinking. So the second kind of thing I talked about at the end of the class, this actually had to do more with feeling the space around you, but I was actually giving you the key too to dropping out of your conceptual mind, which is really a problem to feeling the space around you. The conceptual mind may not even believe that it exists, doesn't believe you can feel the space of consciousness. So this shift is an energetic shift. And so just as the first one is kind of classic mindfulness practice, this is a little more like Qigong, which is the Taoist practice of using attention to move qi, or energy in the body. And so the way that this works is that thoughts, the body, our psychic experience is mapped in the body. The body is this sort of place. And as you begin to know that, you can work with it. And so, particularly in the West, we're very identified with our heads. We very much think that that's where we are. There may be a few individuals who might point to their heart or point to their belly when asked, where do you think you are in the body? But most will point to their head in this culture. And that does something to us. It keeps us in our head. And we have that phrase, being in your head in English, because it means being all wrapped up in your thoughts. It means kind of living in this squirrel cage to some degree. And so there's an energy to that. So you begin by feeling that. Can you feel the way that you're stuck up here? Again, I invite you not to judge yourself. It's just what is. And if you've spent your day having to use your head in some professional capacity, in some, kind of way, as a student, as a teacher, as a person on a computer, most of us have these kinds of jobs. you keep shoving the energy up there to get the job done, and it stays there. It's very hard to plop yourself down and meditate. It can be a little easier in the morning before you get all that going, but by this time of day, the only thing that really helps you is a little fatigue, that'll get you out of your head. But you're here. So those of you who've been with me a while know my little hokey trick. If you kind of rub your palms together first a little to kind of wake them up, and keep them about half an inch to an inch apart. You can shuffle them a little bit like this. You'll feel right in the palm something that feels like magnetism, something that feels like an electric current. So you have to kind of start here just to feel that current open up. When I do this and I start to feel that in the palm, I also feel there's kind of a current going out the fingers as well. But I'll just mention that. So then when you kind of get this going, you can bring them up and put them beside your ears and see if you can let that current go right through your head. So you can feel like you can actually connect with that place where we often think we are, behind the eyes, looking out at the world out there from someplace in here. So you kind of click and drag here. So click on that and just slowly begin to bring that energy down and point the palms at your heart. So the center of the palms are pointing at the heart, somewhat in the center of the chest, where the heart actually is, not just the surface. And then feel something coming down slowly out of your head. I experience it a little bit like maple syrup, about that consistency, about that speed. The energy kind of comes down. You're welcome throughout the week to practice this, or do this even before you meditate. It can help you a lot to be more present. And as you're bringing it down, you're also experiencing what it is to be in the heart rather than in the head. What would it be to look through the eyes of the heart? The heart has eyes. Look through them. Look through them at the body. Look out to whatever you see. It's very different than looking through the physical eyes. And you can almost feel how trying to do this is helping the energy to come down. Calm down slowly. And then bring those palms down where I can't show you very well on the camera, to point at the belly just a little below the navel. And again, it's the deep belly, not the surface belly. Sort of like you had lights in your palms that would come together at a common point. And here, just invite the energy to keep coming down and pool in the belly. You are welcome to meditate this way for the whole time. Have your hands at the heart or at the belly. It seems to really help. So one of the things that we're up against as we meditate is this habit of being in our head, and energetic habit of being in our head, and the need to train our body to be elsewhere. and to be more flexible about that. I know sometimes you have to be in your head, but you don't have to live there all the time. And so this is a way to begin that training, kind of like bring things down to the heart, to the belly, and to live in a way that's deeper in your body. We can talk more about that. You can actually practice walking around out there, looking through the eyes of the heart. There's something, I'm not sure eyes is the right word, but there's also something in the belly. I think of it a little more like a GPS. I'm blanking on the name. A gyroscope in the belly that kind of like orients us in space and time. You can walk down the street, you can walk around the office with that in your awareness, like walking from the belly, walking from the heart. Practice it, really encourage it. It will help you when you sit to meditate to develop these pathways. And I'll just tell you a little story, which may sound a little fantastic to some people, but it really happened. It was the first time my attention really moved from where I thought it was behind the eyes. I was meditating. I had had a pretty strong cup of coffee before I meditated. So, my heart was pounding a little harder than usual. And so, as just a part of a body mindfulness, I was feeling that. I was feeling my pulse. And then without me trying to do anything, just spontaneously, the center of my attention went right into my physical heart, right into the center of my physical heart. And I tell you, it was quite bizarre, because to be in your physical heart is pretty cacophonous, a lot of sound. And the thing is like wiggling and pumping and, going like this. And so if you're actually in the center of it, as the nearest I could tell, I was like in a ventricle or something. And the walls were like going like this. And, there was this flow through it. And it was pretty overwhelming as an experience, I must say. But I recognized where I was. I was actually in the heart. So what in the world? Who's I? And we're so convinced that where I am is the guy looking out, the gal looking out at the world from behind the eyes. That's who I am. But it's really a construction. And it's only the force of habit that makes us cling there, hold tight there. And so it was experiences like that that began to break my belief that this is how it has to be. That this sense of where attention is located, what the center of awareness is, that it can move. It was, my belief that it was where I always had thought it was shattered. And it's been confirmed through subsequent experiences. This was not my imagination, it was direct experience. And one of those like weird yogic moments where the world kind of turns upside down. So perhaps this story will help you have just a little bit more faith that you can actually bring this stuff down. I was talking mostly energetically, not like actually bringing your full awareness, but it might happen. Might happen that you suddenly are the heart, you suddenly are the belly in a much more profound way. To the extent you do that, it's going to be easier to drop into non-conceptual presence. So then finally, just the notion that I'd like to introduce tonight is that really becoming able to drink at the well of being It's like falling out of love with thinking. And we have to first acknowledge that we're in love with it. That we believe that thinking makes us safe. That's one of the reasons why we love it, is we think that our thoughts are what make us safe. Our ability to plan, to imagine the future and plan for it. Our ability to worry and try to avoid what we're afraid of. And in a way that's even subtler, our thoughts feel safe maybe because our feelings don't. Our feeling being is threatening to us in some way. And so we may live in our thoughts more than we have to because it feels safer. Sometimes when people go from here to here, or invite them to come down into the heart, they get a response from the mind. The mind says one of two things to try to prevent it. It either says this isn't real, or this isn't safe. Isn't that interesting? Our thinking minds, almost like they have a personality of their own, which they do. We're actually made up of a variety of selves, and our thinking selves, our thinking self is kind of one version of us, and it can be actually threatened by this. So it can tell you, no, this isn't real. This can't be real. Or it can also tell you this isn't safe. It actually isn't as safe to be in your heart. It hurts there. Don't go there, And so it has a point. I'll probably talk about this more in future classes because that's really one of the other barriers to drinking from the well of being is the unprocessed felt stuff inside of us. Unwanted often. But we have to get past our minds, our thinking minds, to do that. And so the belief, the deep faith in our thinking that it's going to keep us safe can be a barrier. And gradually you have to experiment and find out that it's not true. You can fall in love with presence. In fact, that's really almost how it has to happen eventually. Everything else is like a preparation for falling in love with non-conceptual presence. And like real falling in love, you can't just make that happen. You can't will it to happen. You can't will yourself to fall in love with someone, can you? Though there are things you can do that will keep you from losing your love. But in this case, this deep faith we have in thinking can be released as you gradually feel the effects of presence. Our thinking minds is also where we turn to be entertained. We love our thoughts for that reason. They give us all sorts of stuff to do, and opinions, and things to wonder about. And our minds, our thinking minds, are what we think give us understanding. We look to them for understanding, and so in school, it's most of what school deals with, is the understanding that comes through the conceptual mind. So by the time you're an adult, you've been deeply kind of initiated into that kind of knowing. But you may not be so initiated to this kind of knowing. Hopefully, it came through other people who were there for you, who loved you. And you learned that kind of intelligence, the kind of intelligence that cares how you feel, cares how other people feel, and connects with them. But to the extent that that can be wounded, you can be hop up here and kind of be staying there, hanging out there. You know, we also identify with our thoughts. We think that they're ours. That's partly why it's so powerful to see how thoughts just arise. It makes it harder for you to claim them as mine. You know, but once you claim thoughts as mine, you develop this strong loyalty to them. You know, you get defensive if someone questions them, and you position them around you so that you give yourself the sense that you know what's what. And as we go deeply into this practice, we're in a sense surrendering that as our primary orientation in the world, to have our thinking ducks in a row, to kind of know in a thought way exactly where we are and who we are. That loosens. And so not everything in us is ready for that or wants that. So that's a part of this practice. So going into the week, I would ask you to just notice any resistance to the practice that comes up. If it's difficult to sit down and do it, or while you're doing it, if you feel like, how can I say it? Sometimes presence draws you in, but sometimes it doesn't. And just take some time to notice that, to acknowledge it, and even perhaps to acknowledge that some part of you loves thinking and isn't willing to give it up. That's actually the beginning of being able to relinquish it, is to acknowledge it. To acknowledge that you like, all those thoughts. And I'll admit, I kind of like my thoughts. I do, and sometimes it's great to be thinking. I just don't want to be a slave to it. And so when it's time to think. When it's time to meditate, let that go. That's the skill we're working toward. And just as a final note, be really kind to yourself about just where you are around that, just how much of a wandering mind you have. And don't worry. And don't judge if you can help it. But that is just another thought if you're judging yourself. If you're saying, you're not where you should be, that's just another thought.